And take their seat. We are going to start in a couple of minutes. Uh, Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the sixth dialogue, which is about rethinking innovation, alternative approaches for people and planet. And as you know, science and technology for post-growth is the theme of this conference. So what we are going to talk about today in this panel is going to be quite interesting for everyone. But before that, let me introduce myself. I am Aviram. I work at the Post-Growth Innovation Lab at the University of Vigo. And with me, we have three wonderful panelists. We have Adrian Smith, who is Professor of Technology and Society at University of Sussex. We have Andrea Jiménez, who is lecturer at the School of Information at Sheffield University. And we have Professor Alejandra Boni, who is a human rights and democracy expert at the, and professor at the Technical University of Valencia. So we have a very exciting interdisciplinary panel of scholars coming from very diverse background, and we all are going to talk about the ideas of innovation and how we can talk about alternative conceptualization of innovation. But before talking about innovation, I will briefly set the stage. Before talking about innovation, I will take you back to the past in the history. Like there has been also different ways of conceptualizing, understanding, seeing, and ways of changing the world. And one of the very famous Indian political thinker, freedom fighter, and economic thinker has written about this in the 1940s and 50s when India was under the imperial rule. At that time, he has argued, God forbid that India should ever take to industrialism in the manner of the West. The economic imperialism of a single tiny island kingdom is today keeping the world in chains. If an entire nation of 300 million took to similar economic exploitation, it would strip the world bare like locust. So what he is talking about is not about population, but he is talking about the imperial mode of living. And imperial mode of living has remained the core of the capitalist system or even many other systems like which became more robust after that. Whether it is, he was talking about UK, but then the economic center shifted to US. US became the most hegemonic economic power, and later on in today's time, we are seeing a more multipolar world, like where we are seeing the rise of China and many other nations. But one thing is common, where economic or imperial mode of living is at the core. And at this system, like how innovations are imagined, and one of the dominant way innovation has been imagined is in the form of techno-economic way. So market is the dominant principle, and all other values of innovation has been sidelined. So if this is the system, and if there is only one dominant way of saying innovation, how we can talk about the alternatives to innovation? And for that, we have three questions to our panelists. First of all, I will start with Andrea. We will be talking about the first question, which is about how we know in science and technology studies and history of science that the dominant science, technology, and innovation paradigms are critiqued as a colonial project, fueling economic growth, devouring people and planet at the peripheries of the system, within the system, and whatever is called outside the system. In such a context, how can we reimagine a post-growth critique of innovation from a decolonial lens? So this is the first question. We will start with Andrea, and then we will move to our next panelist. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Aviram, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm really glad you started talking about a bit of a historical perspective, because I brought two history books that I wanted to start telling you about. So the first is this book by Michael Adas, who's a historian. And the book is titled Machines as the Measures of Men. And he explains how technology and science were crucial in establishing and maintaining Western dominance over other cultures. So he argues that the so-called explorers of the 18th century believed that their technological advancements were not just tools, but were ideological weapons. And he points out that they saw their perceived scientific achievements and technological advancements as markers of cultural and racial superiority. And this in itself justified the dominance there, that they were the ones that were meant to be dominant over others. A particular feature of this was the European colonizers' desire to dominate nature through technology, which to them reinforced their view of being the supreme race. So in other words, an engineer's desire and their designs and the machines extracting the Earth's resources were for them the highest form of human expression, and confirmed that they were destined to be dominant. So that's one part of history. And then there's another book that was also worth highlighting here from Eden Medina that's titled Beyond Imported Magic. And just Adrian was reminding me of this book yesterday. And she's writing from the Latin American context, and they're challenging the view that science and technology traveled unchanged from the global north to the global south, and instead they show and they share stories of resistance, stories of local creation and use of technology and adaptation of some technologies as well. So just as there was technological imposition, there was also creative resistance. And I'm telling you these two different and yet interrelated parts of history, because I think it's really important that we recognize that just as science, technology, and innovation were key in the process of colonization to reinforce it, to justify it, and maintain it, there's also been always a push for resisting, adapting, creating innovation and technology for this context. And I think that's really, really important. I think that we can think about innovation as instrumental in the capitalist militarized systems of power, but we can also consider it as ways in which people resist and adapt and create. And I think that second one is the one that perhaps will be much relevant from a degrowth perspective and for these kind of conversations we've been having in this conference. Having said that, I think it's really important that we spend some time critiquing that dominant narrative of innovation, right? Because we know that there is assumptions around continuing to use innovation and technology within a capitalist system, within a capitalist productive system. I want to bring here a little bit of the kind of eco-modernist perspective, right? Because I know that in the degrowth community, there's a big critique around the eco-modernist perspective. So the eco-modernist manifesto, for example, proposes generating and applying technology designed to reduce environmental impacts while maintaining high standards of living. So in other words, they suggest that technology can help sustain the capitalist production, and it can allow us to continue with our ways of living. So big emphasis on growth, but there's also more than that. So for those who were the session on Tuesday, Samer made a very compelling argument on how technology and innovation are leveraged in the military. We know that there's many of our technological gadgets that were created, right? And some of the digital and the biometric technologies of today they're being tested in refugee camps as we speak. So it's important to know that this form of innovation, besides being about growth, is incredibly damaging for people and nature. And I think technology seems to be that which has helped destroy the world, and also that which will save it. So it feels like the conversation is that we either accept it or we reject it altogether. And to me, this is a very simplistic kind of binary perspective, and I think is perhaps not too helpful. So I think, how do we think about technology and innovation in that context? Because I think our destiny feels closely dependent by what we think about innovation and technology. So in a kind of post-growth world or a decolonial world, as you were saying, how do we think about innovation? Is there even a space to talk about innovation? To me, I think we need to bring it back to basics. So what do we mean by innovation? And there's loads of different definitions, but to me, innovation in the broadest sense is the process of developing new goods, new services, new processes, and new products for the collective good. And I think this is the definition, but obviously we know that the most dominant one is that which is patentable, technological, commercial, because those are the kinds of innovation that get adopted in business models and that generate profit. But there's multiple other ways of thinking about innovation. I mean, if you come from in a business school or a management school, you've already heard about this loads of different definitions of innovation that try to operate outside a logic of growth and that are meant to be more environmentally sound and kind of promote a more of a collective way of being, right? Grassroots innovation, I mean, Adrian has written extensively about that. Frugal innovation, jugaad innovation, reverse innovation, bottom of the pyramid innovation. I mean, you name it, there's an endless list of concepts that are trying to explain other forms of innovation. Now, what I think is the issue with these concepts, there's two things that happen. Either they operate at a kind of small-scale pilot level and are often experiencing challenges for not necessarily being supported, or they get co-opted, they get absorbed and sometimes stolen from their origins and try to scale them up. And there's always problems when they're trying to scale them up. So I think that is a really important thing to think about, because when we talk about these alternatives to innovation, they already exist, they're already there. So it's not necessarily about reimagining innovation, but it's about centering those experiences and those stories. And it's also more about trying to think about what are the societal arrangements, what are the institutions, what are the organizational arrangements that need to exist for these initiatives to flourish and for these initiatives to be able to thrive. And that's perhaps the more interesting conversation. So just to conclude then, I think the point of my presentation is to try to understand that innovation is not a monolithic concept, that it has the power to either uphold or challenge existing structures of power. And so we need to be able to criticize innovation where it is needed, but also I think we need to be able to appreciate when it is convivial and when it is socially just and ecologically sound. And I think that's perhaps in this kind of community, I think that is the interesting innovation story that we need to be telling.
Thank you, Andrea. As she has rightly pointed out, is there a need to completely throw out the idea of innovation, or do we need to reconceptualize in a different way? And as she is pointing out, the need is not to completely throw out, but to recenter the idea of innovation and to take it out from the dominant imagination in which way it has been imagined most of the time in techno-economic terms, and see what are the alternatives. And it's more about recentering these alternatives. And to recenter these alternatives, we need institutions, we need governance model, and there can be no better than Adrian to speak on what kind of institutions and governance paradigm are supporting alternate innovation models, and how the alternate framing of innovations can go beyond solutionism and offer more radical possibilities for people and planet. So, okay. Adrian.
Right. Thank you very much, Aviram. Thanks, Andrea, as well, for setting things up so nicely. And thanks, everyone, for being here. I think maybe I should start. I mean, solutionism's quite, maybe I'll say what I think you mean by that. And it's a term, as far as I know, it's coined by Evgeny Morozov a few years back now, who was, well, now he's a sort of writer and thinker, but worked in sort of the technology industry, digital technologies and software and sort of Silicon Valley. And then I think over the years began to think, well, this is just mad, what we're doing here. And he wrote about this in several books, still does, and thinking about the politics of technology. And I think for him, solutionism is this sort of promotion or boosting of that there are quite neatly defined problems that can be fixed with the right technologies, okay? And we just need to get the right technology. So our cities aren't running very well, they're not very green, we've got problems of aging and mobility, so if we just insert sensors around the city and generate enough real-time information about the city, we'll be able to better manage them and sort of fix the problems without really looking any deeper at some of the underlying causes of those things that are generating problematic forms of urbanism. And almost not really worrying whether it works or not. The important thing is just you get the investment and you get the opportunity to kind of run the city in a smart way, so to speak. So it's very technocratic solutionism. It's anti-democratic, I think. And there's a kind of presumption of some form of technological determinism in that. And we often, I think, like in sort of our popular notions of technology, think about AI, it does seem to determine the future, this technological determinism. But actually, I think that's just needs to be challenged, and it is challenged quite widely. And people like Morozov, but also the field of STS, try to open the black box of technology and look at some of the political, economic, and cultural forces that are shaping technology choices and the kinds of technologies we have in our society. And I think and filtering what kinds of research agendas get funded, what does not, what's the undone science, what kinds of investments and sort of businesses, technology-oriented businesses get investment, and so on and so forth. So actually, technologies are more socially constructed, but certainly socially shaped, we could say. And maybe later, as they get some momentum and they become diffused, it begins to feel like they're determining us. But it's actually the underlying political, economic, and cultural sort of forces and choices that are behind all of this. Bruno Latour once said, who's a big sociologist, famous French sociologist, once described technology as society made durable, okay? Technologies can kind of lock us into and reinforce these political and economic structures. We have to challenge that. And I think degrowth does challenge that because it's starting from a lot of very different assumptions and aspirations for kind of political and economic structures and culture it would like to see in the world. And so that's, if, you know, as we push that and mobilize for that, that's going to change the way technologies are contested and shaped, hopefully, and sort of propagate in the world, I think. This is something that the field of science and technology studies has been doing for decades, is unpacking and critiquing and looking at the social shapers of technologies and providing criticism. And it provides us with many different useful theoretical resources, very many methods and ways of deconstructing technologies. It's not rooted in degrowth, but I think there's lots of exciting kind of potential for it to engage and have a dialogue. And obviously, the Post-Growth Innovation Lab here in Pontevedra is pioneering a lot of that stuff. And I think on Tuesday, when we were asked what fields beyond post-development, ecological economics and degrowth could enrich the sort of movement and debates, I think the one missing was STS, actually. I would hope that at the end of this conference, some of you think that we need to look at STS and how to kind of bring that into degrowth. And the interesting thing with STS is it was born of activism. It came out of a lot of scientists and engineers mainly, some social scientists and humanities researchers, like Morozov, really, just thinking this military-industrial complex that we're graduating into is bonkers, it's mad, it's violent, it's destructive. How do we counter that? How do we dismantle it and build alternatives? Now, STS has evolved since then. In some places it retains those activist roots, in others certainly not. But again, I think that might be reasons to be hopeful that there can be fruitful encounters. What maybe it's not so good on, I think, I'm not sure here actually, colleagues will kind of murder me, but is the construction of the alternatives. You know, there's a look at like techno-science and the systems and structures and the critiques along the lines I've been saying, but when it comes to alternatives, and if you like, thinking on how to build institutions to support alternative ways of doing innovation, innovating alternative technologies, I think there's still loads of work to be done. I'll say a bit about that in the time I've got available. And whether the question was about, do alternative framings of innovation kind of help us get beyond solutionism or counter it in some way? And I think they certainly do. And certainly the kinds of alternatives, I've collaborated with many colleagues, looking at community energy, eco-housing, food, agroecology, with colleagues here in Pontevedra looking at the right to repair and repairable things, many areas. These are all kind of creative productions of novelty and innovation. I mean, for me, I'd expand innovation a little bit, and even if we're recovering or recuperating older practices or traditional practices, it still involves novelty to integrating it into what we're doing now. Or if we take a practice from elsewhere that's been practiced for many, many years and we bring it to another locality, it's still novel and innovative for that locality. So I think it does beg questions of where innovation ends, but if you're thinking about repair or even maintenance and how to improve that, it's going to involve some forms of novelty and therefore some forms of innovation. And the kind of alternative innovations come from social movements a lot. So the ideas, the values, the principles, the kind of models they've got contrast very sharply with the sort of conventional kind of forms of innovation that Andrea was talking about. And therefore, the kind of design criteria and the kind of how one thinks about innovation and what you're trying to do is different. Given that the military, I mean, maybe for an example, one movement I did study was a kind of the movement for socially useful production, which emerged in the UK in the early to mid 1970s originally in a company called Lucas Aerospace that made electromechanical components for warplanes, okay? So it had contracts with the state to provide weapons of violence. And the workers decided they'd had enough of that. At the grassroots level, the local branches of the trade unions began working together to say, how do we challenge this? They were also facing redundancy because computer technologies were coming into the workplace and displacing human work rather than enhancing it, and various things. It's a complex story. But the important thing is what they did is they over the process of a year, they looked at the fabrication, design technologies they had in their workplace. They looked at the skills they got. They talked with their communities. They talked with the kind of left institutions in their neighborhoods and the trades councils and so forth. And they came up with an alternative strategy for the company that included how to change the labor process, 150 designs and prototypes for what they called socially useful production. And they demanded their right to make socially useful products in place of weapons of war. And that included things like wind turbines, heat pumps, electric vehicles, health equipment, equipment for children's play, and so on and so forth. But what was important was it was driven by a different set of values to the kinds of technology development that was going on then in the conventional economy. They wanted this, these were like, it was, well, they called it technological agitprop. These were trying to provoke people to think, well, why aren't these socially useful products being made? How do we do that? And they were pressing for workplace democracy, community participation in planning, production for social use rather than for commodification and exchange and so forth. And so the design criteria in their process for coming up with all these prototypes were, you know, it had to be democratic, appropriate scale, easily repairable, and ecologically sensitive. And also, there were ideas there about doing this in solidarity with what was called the Third World back then. These are all solutions, and I think you see this with a lot of these kind of alternative innovations that anticipate and demand wider changes in society. So in this case, with the Lucas plan and the social use of production, you know, they were anticipating socialized markets and a democratic state that would support these activities, public ownership, and techniques of democratic planning, if you like. And in doing all of this, they don't just produce prototypes or artifacts, and this is true for community energy and eco-housing and all of these things. You're producing as well new methods, new narratives, new communities and relations, new subjectivities, and so on and so forth. And I think it's for them reasons that this is beyond solutionism. I've been talking on a bit, so I'm going to cut things short a bit. But importantly, they're things that these workers or that community energy activists and movements cannot kind of do alone. We do need the wider institutional changes. There are kind of like counter-institutions in these movements, such as sort of inspired by things like free, libre, open source software, commoning and so forth. So there are these kind of norms and resources. There are networks of social centres and to make things happen. But they're quite weak in the face of the dominant science, technology and innovation institutions in society. And I think that's where the challenge is really, is thinking about how to build these counter-institutions and make them stronger. And also, why that is especially important is how to deal with the large-scale technologies. I mean, I gave you the Lucas plan because this was industrial manufacturing that they were trying to transform. So it's a big technological system that they were doing. It helps us think, I think, beyond the sort of small scale. How do we common infrastructures and so forth and decide what's a sufficient infrastructure? And I think there's so much work to be done there. And maybe that's where I'll stop.
All right, thank you. So Adrian has talked a lot about like how there are alternate ways of doing things. It's not only about product innovation or like the economic of the innovation, but it is also about how innovations are governed, how new ways of doing are imagined and how they have been imagined. And in this context, like now we will move to Sandra, who would be talking about how alternate innovation policies can be made accountable and responsive towards the vulnerable communities and take into account the threatened environmental resources in peripheries within the industrialized, emerging and developing economies in post-growth scenarios and societies. So to you, Sandra.
Thanks, Aviram. Thanks, Mario, and all your team for inviting us to be here, and thanks also the both of you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about policies and innovation policies, and I would like to start with a particular example, if I may. Okay, it's something that we are working together with different organizations, policymakers, local government, provincial government in Catalonia. I'm based in Valencia, in Ingenio, and also I work with a group of people that are here with policymakers. And to me, this is an example of a potential transformative innovation policy that we can discuss later if you think that is really transformative or not. So this is the context. It's an example. It's Catalonia, one of the Spanish regions. Particular is Lleida. It's a rural inner area of Catalonia with this kind of characteristic, low population, geographical and territorial imbalances. So half of the population is in 4 cities, in big cities, and the rest is scattered in different municipalities. And the 40% of the total area is populated for small municipalities with fewer than 500 inhabitants. So it's really small towns. It's a rural area with an economic model reliant on primary sector, and with little capacity to generate alternatives and produce job opportunities, especially for young people that migrate. So they have a problem of migration and rural depopulation, and also the rural area or production is based on an intensive model of livestock and agriculture production, and there are big companies that dominate the market. So this is more or less the context in Lleida, in this region of Catalonia. So in 2018, 8 small municipalities, with the support of the provincial governments, they also small producer and some research organizations, but mainly they were local authorities. They identify the circular bioeconomy as an opportunity to give some added value to what they are producing and also to retain people in the rural areas. And they start what now, in 2024, so 6 years later, is named the Shared Agenda of Lleida, Pyrenees, and Aran. So it grew. No? Start from Lleida, and now is more growing north to all this area. So this is they formulate along this 6-year process that we have the opportunity to work with, like a shared vision, which is we wish for our area to become a territory that values our strategic geolocation, our resources, our capacities, our potentialities to develop in a fair and smart terms a competitive and sustainable green, circular, highly digitized economic model. And all of that is framed under an innovation policy. What they are doing different activities. This is a work in progress because this is happening at the moment, but they are trying to set up like a biohub to produce alternative proteins, prototypes of bioproducts using farm and livestock waste mainly. Also, they are working with local authorities to empower and push an energy transition with energy communities, local communities. They are setting an observatory for indigenous resources to identify nature-based solutions and services. So this is more or less the kind of things. They're doing more things, but this is more or less the frame of what they are trying to do in this area. And who are they? Who are these local authorities, the provincial government, the support of the regional government, small farmers, not the big companies so far. They are not so far interested in this kind of alternatives. Also university, research, some small companies, citizens, etc. So more or less this is what is going on in this area of Catalonia. And the shared agendas model, which is the example for us of a transformative innovation policy, is based in these different initiatives, transformative initiatives that can be supported by local actors. Always identify a place-based challenge. So the most important thing is this group of people identify something that is really valuable and important, no, for their own needs. So it's starting from that. In that case was alternative for jobs and also for giving opportunities for these farmers. In another area of Catalonia is health, and they have a big group of people that are getting old, and this is putting a lot of pressure on the medical system, and they want to develop solutions for families, for people, for patients, but in a different way. So they identify the challenge, they develop this portfolio of different initiatives, and then the regional government, in that case, all the local, all the public authorities are supporting this kind of policy, giving money, try to find resources, etc. So those are some of the characteristics of this transformative innovation policy approach. Is holistic, is dynamic, is systemic, always is systemic. So technology is one of the components of the system, but not the main one. Everything is shaped by social, cultural characteristics. It's based on experimentation, and this is something different from other kinds of policy that are more strategic planning, blueprints, logical framework, no? These kind of ways of understanding. This is more experimenting, try, and learn, no? Learn and then try alternatives. So you have to find public authorities and that really believe in this kind of approach to policy, which is not easy. So we were lucky to find this group of people in Catalonia that really want to do this kind of way of doing policy, but the experimentation and learning is one of the main features. Is systemic. They have a model of governance that includes the local actors, so it's not something directed by the policymaker, but it's something decided collectively. Of course, there are power imbalances, because this is real life, but it's a way of bringing people all together to design and to develop this policy. And then also they want to scale, no? There is also this ambition of not remain in the local, no? In the small local, but scale solutions. And those are like three questions that come to my mind for this audience. One is connected to what you said before, is technologies do not operate in a vacuum. No? They're shaped by cultural, economic, social, geographical factors. And this is an example. That the example of Lleida is not, we cannot replicate this in another area, no? Because it's specific for this specific area. And that's why we use the idea of socio-technical system, no? To understand the technology connected with social values, policy, markets, knowledge production, etc. Then the role of policy. So policy is policymakers or policy is an enabler of initiatives. But they are not the main, they are main actors, but there are other innovators, other people developing solutions. And policy should enable, open the space, no, for this. And also, there is a strong emphasis on experimentation and a different idea of governance, as I said before. And lastly, something that I'm particularly concerned, because I work in a research institution, is the kind of knowledge that we, all of us, need to be part of this policy engagement. And to me, it's important to talk about transdisciplinary knowledge. So it's a knowledge co-produced together with other kind of actors that are not research actors. No? Could be policymakers, farmers, whoever is involved in this particular experimentation. No? And that's why we use participatory methodology, action research. Well, we use formative evaluation in our case, but it's based on this action research and co-production of knowledge. And also, well, theory is important, but the practical implementation of theory is super important, and we revisit and rethink our theoretical approach doing this kind of engagement. And of course, power imbalances and imbalances between knowledges are also important. You have to take into account, but you have to co-produce, no, this space to involve all the actors. So this is more or less what I would like to share with you.
Thank you, Sandra. So before opening the session for questions from the audience, as she ended on the note of the idea of transdisciplinarity and talking about technology at the core of the debate. And bringing these things together, I just wanted to pose one question, like, which is very critical for the degrowth scholars and is also critical for innovation studies or STS guys. So how to imagine technologies in this whole system, because we live in a technology mediated world. Even though there are alternate ways of doing things, there are different innovation models, there are different governance models, different political way of engaging with innovation and promoting innovation, social innovation or frugal innovation, but still, like, in many spheres of our life are guided by technology. And how to imagine technology? Do technology have one value, or do technology have many values? And the material politics of technology becomes more important in this context. So just me give you one example. Like, a lot of time people assume that bicycling is convivial. Bicycling is the alternate to many other forms of technology. But even bicycle industry, the global bicycle industry is more than $100 billion industry. And that is involved with a lot of innovation, big companies, the material requirement of producing those bicycles, and the impact of that on different economies. So any change in the technology or the use of the technology has a lot of impact on the people's life. And there comes the question of people, especially in terms of labor and in terms of environment. Similarly, there is the example of, like, solar energy. So a lot of time people assume that solar energy doesn't need the same kind of material requirement like many others. But there has been studies which argued that let me give you example of India, that to achieve the solar target, India needs as much land equivalent to Spain to achieve those targets. So even though the material requirement is less, but then to install that kind of technology, to move from one technology to other through innovations, you still need land, you still need minerals, and the minerals need to be extracted. So how we can go beyond the simplistic understanding of technology or innovation while talking about these things, so that we don't end up harming more to marginalized communities or environment in faraway places. So any reflections from any of you?
Well, yeah, maybe I can start. Well, first of all, I think what you just said is really, really powerful and compelling, and I think it's really important for this kind of conversation. What you say makes me think about the idea of scale and scaling, and also the interconnectedness of the world. So a part of me wonders if scaling these kind of technologies are productive, and what happens when you scale them. And at the same time, I think about how when you make changes, particularly, say, if you think about circular economy, so in this project that is led by Mario, the Just to See to Circular Economy, one of the main things that is coming out from that project is that any kind of change that you make in the global north is going to have an impact in the global south, right? Because of extractivism. And so I think it's really important that we put these things on the table when we're having conversations about what are the technologies and what are the innovations really going to be part of the future. Because I think we need to have that conversation. We need to be able to think about those technologies, but we need to recognize that there's always going to be who wins and who loses from the decisions that are being made at the policy level, right? There will be winners, there will be losers. In many ways, some of the losers are going to be in the majority of the world, unfortunately. So we need to be able to have those conversations and maybe ask ourselves if scaling is the right thing to do or not.
Do you want to?
No.
Okay. So there's the thing there about materiality, which I'll come to in a moment, but also, I think, picking up on what Andrea was just saying there, I think thinking about the democratization of technology and insisting on some of these things being deliberated and decided democratically, or allowing space for dominant ways of doing technology to be challenged, to have like a radical agonistic democracy inside our technology institutions or our innovation institutions, even around sort of, I don't know, social innovations, which are often technological, is really, really important. Because, referring back to what I said earlier about how, if you like, the way technology develop can kind of reinforce power, you know, what so-called disruptive innovations can serve the status quo, really. That's what it's all about, you know, and not really addressing the deeper fundamentals. So it's almost like, you can think, when you think of technology sociologically, you see them as sort of almost like reflecting and reinforcing the rules in society, and almost like a form of legislation, but there's no kind of parliament or democratic oversight of how these rules are being written, and it's just left to, I mean, AI is like, for me, a particularly kind of scary illustration of just how poor our technology assessment and deliberation institutions are, that these concentrated powers are allowed to just go along with this, and the best we can do is hope that it's going to be a bit ethical, or there'll be one or two use cases that will have some social use, and not really address what's driving this and changing the underlying kind of structures, really. And then the materiality, very, very brief about, I mean, the one that came to my mind was wind energy. And like, there's a material relationship there. The engineering of wind turbines is that the amount of electricity you generate is related to the swept area of the turbine, yeah? The bigger the swept area, the more electricity you get. So if you double the length of your wind turbine blade, you're going to get the square of that increase of electricity. Now, for the pioneers who developed the first modern, robust wind turbines in Denmark, which tended to be alternative technologies, and farmers and agriculturers creating cooperatives to create, necessarily at that point, smaller scale wind turbines, but with this cooperative movement and with the backing of the anti-nuclear movement to insist on changes to the electricity provision so they can connect to the grid in various ways. That was being conceived within a kind of low-energy society. There was a kind of social vision. The technology was kind of a particular social technical configuration, we'd say in STS, to that. And they didn't want to kind of push this, material relation to the limits. But then when these technologies enter into institutions and there's powerful interest, and this is a very investable, profitable area, then you're getting these economic and social kind of and political drivers that really want to push this square law to the maximum. And that's why we get these mega wind farms that the only people who can own them are massive investment funds, you know, whose offices are the other side of the world and so forth. I remember years ago I was at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, which is very important in the UK history of alternative technology, and they were trying to replace their wind turbine that they'd had for decades. And there wasn't one, they were all too big, the new ones. There's none on the market that they could buy. They had to buy a second-hand one because of this sort of drive, if you like. So I think that's why we have to, you know, I think scale is important, but it's thinking where does that drive for scaling up come from, if you like, and how to resist it or allow people to deliberate what's an appropriate scale for their community, if you like.
I don't have an answer, especially if we think in a global terms. No, it's so difficult because something that we are doing here can have consequences in other parts of the world. I think it's something that what we do day by day is having consequences in other parts of the world. To me, I mean, technology can be a mean, a good mean, especially if I think in people with less opportunities. No? The example of Lleida is an example of local farmers, local agriculture, that they cannot afford a decent way of living. So, and in this case, this particular technology, in this particular context, shaped in that way, and also allowing the participation of people in designing the technology. I don't think they succeed in this big plant. I don't know what can be the kind of involvement of local farmers, but for sure the governance of all of that should be participatory. So in that way it makes sense to me, no? But always shaping this in a specific context and taking into account people that are placed in that specific areas.
Thank you. We have around 10 minutes, so should we go to the audience if they have any pressing question or comment?
Thank you. Yeah, is it working? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your insights being shared with everyone. Very interesting. I was wondering about the innovation life cycle, right? We normally think that, generally, the innovation system and the science and technology system is kind of pushing for, let's say, shorter times for the production of new concepts, new ideas, new technologies at the end. And but when we look at this sort of landscape where we want to incorporate the knowledge in a way that really contributes to improvement of people's lives, then we can think that maybe what we need is more time to really harness the advantages that a given knowledge or technology can provide to these people. But if you then want to get the buy-in of the academia or the research community into these sort of processes, you reach to a contradiction, because normally there are no that many incentives in the system for the research community to contribute to processes that are not that kind of slowing down the production of technologies and innovations. And we don't really, with the knowledge that we have, we don't really get to know how many benefits this can lead to a given community. We don't have the time to really understand how much, what sort of impacts. We don't really still have the indicators to measure, to understand how much benefit the knowledge available can bring into a given community. That's something I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can we take a couple of more comments and then they can answer? So there.
Thanks. I'll just ask as briefly as I can. I'd love to know if any of you, just thinking of the caution expressed about scaling, which I understand, and the need for the challenge in developing strong counter-institutional supports, which I also hear. What would be, people talk about scaling out an infrastructure that supports replication, and I still feel like there could be so much more done on this, and is there any inspiring example of strong counter-institutions that support scaling out and replication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please go on.
One more. Thank you. Thanks for the panel and for organizing this. I must say that I'm always questioning a bit why we're really interested in innovation in particular. And I hear that we're interested in promoting it. I'm hearing also that as researchers we're interested in understanding change, and that's why some of us study innovation. But I wonder, are we interested in promoting and understanding innovation or a series of useful, helpful, or whatever we understand as good initiatives? And why then are we focusing on whether they are new or not? Because when we apply innovation in policy, especially, we kind of seem to end up having to prove that something has not been done before. And as soon as we have done it, we have to invent a new thing so that we can get funding again. I really have examples of this. And so I think that's one side of my question. Why are we really focusing on innovation and not on the actual things that matter in the process? And then, as a provocation, I wanted to ask the speakers and maybe the audience to think about whether slavery was a social innovation. And think about it, because at the time when slavery was first implemented, probably this was seen as a common good for a lot of people, probably the mainstream especially. And if it was a social innovation at the time, what does that mean for what we now consider a social innovation? And if it wasn't, then why not? Because really, what is it that differentiates, or when do we draw the line? When is something innovative, or is it really just about being new? And then again, I come to the question: is that, yeah?
All right, thank you. Can we move to the last question and then the panelists can answer it? Aitor. Who will it do? Yeah.
Thank you very much. It will be short. I really think that it's useful, this centrality of technology here, talking about degrowth and STS, but I'm also a bit worried that we are maybe over-focusing that in the democratic level or in the democratic dimension, which is crucial, for sure. No, but discussion about democracy and technology is quite old, and I think that we want to discuss about degrowth, no, and degrowth in technology, probably like emphasizing like the imperial dimension in terms of materiality, political relationship that our technology has today. Maybe it's more important, or we are not doing it enough. You know, in the sense that one point that it's here in discussion is which is actually the type of way of living, the type of technological level are we actually thinking about. Because in the discussion that we are having now, you can have arrive to the conclusion that we will have degrowth industrial society democratically, no? Which I think is not the case, which actually we are facing the necessity of rethinking, but also saying no, or the letting, having forced a bit of a kind of a disindustrialization, not giving more centrality to other type of techniques. So I would really be happy to hear you a bit more about that, because democratic, it's important, but maybe it's not enough, no?
All right, thank you to the panelists.
Maybe it's, okay, all right. Wow, where are my glasses here? Good questions. I think I really appreciated your point about when we're thinking about institutional changes, we need to change our models of innovation. I think at the moment, particularly in green growth, and this is something degrowth could really push at, you know, actually in being critical and sharp about this, is there's this idea we can take the innovation systems we've got and we just sort of redirect them a bit and they go in a greener direction. But I think we need to dismantle them. And it just strikes me as a bit odd why it's the same old actors in these models, firms, university research institutes, investors, entrepreneurs. They're important and we need to address them. But the really interesting kind of solutions to real things, if you like, where there's a lot of creativity, and we could debate actually whether we call it innovation or whether that's just actually a problematic in some ways. I don't know, local city-states maybe, or regional governments that want to do things, you know, close to or interested in degrowth. There's kind of like all the kind of hacking. One infrastructure I think is really interesting, although it's not very oriented towards sustainability, has just been the whole commons-based peer production movement, I think, and these opening of workshops where people can learn how to fabricate and design things and think about kind of material culture in a very direct way, which certainly in consumer societies is quite a radical thing, I think, and how, you know, you go in and what you do and the designs you do, you share. That's the deal. It's kind of, you know, a kind of open and sort of this design commons kind of globally. Now we could think about the impacts of all that, I suppose, but there's an infrastructure there for circulating rapidly things like making prosthetic limbs in locations that, or as we heard from Ugo yesterday, medical equipment where you can't import it and things like that. I think there's, so not to kind of, well, yeah, okay, that's the one example. And that's made me lose my thread a little bit, so maybe I'll just stop there maybe, yeah? But thank you.
Maybe Andrea, the last word. We have 1 minute to
okay.
wrap it up, so please.
Well, I would love to talk about your question, because I think that to me is the question, right? I mean, there's moments in my life where I'm like, why don't we just get rid of the word altogether? You know, the innovation, it's such a powerful, it's such a compelling word for policymakers, for organizations, because it's such an umbrella term for so many different things, right? It's like there to solve any kind of problem. It can be good, and I think sometimes I wonder if we would do better without using that word. I mean, I know in some of the research I do in Peru with indigenous communities, where we're working together to try to explore what science, technology, and innovation mean for them. They'll tell you that they want to use the word innovation because strategically it's a way to challenge the status quo, because that's the language of the system that those in power are using, and they're not just using it as in a discursive sense, but there's a whole system in place to fund innovation, to support innovation, and so they want to use that word as a way to challenge the status quo. And so I suppose to me this is all about how do we think change happens, right? Do you want to work change through the system, therefore you use their language, you use the tools, you use that, or do you want to work at the, you think change can happen at the margins by coming from the bottom up, right? And so I don't necessarily have an answer of yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't, because I think it's complex, and I think our starting point shouldn't be from a kind of purist view of, okay, well, no, we're not going to use this word, because I wonder if that's actually going to lead to change. But I think it's a really important question to be asking ourselves, especially in this kind of conference.
To the issue of time, which is super important. So in this way of understanding doing innovation, having time to experiment, to learn, to try to find indicators if you want, or whatever you need, is super important. And it's not easy. And the good thing of some policymakers, not all of them, but some of them that exist in the world, they try to protect this space to experiment and to invite different people, researchers, but also other kind of people to work together. And this is not so common, but this is happening in the realm of innovation. So it's not black and white. You can find examples, good examples to try to, and others that are not so good.
All right, so thank you. I will end this session with the idea that, the question is, can we rebuild the house with the tools of the master? Or do we need new tools, or new meanings, or new ways to see things? But the whole point of this panel was to initiate these discussions, not to have the final word. So I hope we have been able to raise some provocative questions, which we will continue to talk over the months and years. And thank you all for participating, and thank you for the panelists for your words.